How's your week going so far?
My week is going very strangely. There was a wildfire in my neighborhood on Sunday, and I had to evacuate overnight. Um, Everything's fine. My house is fine. The neighborhood is generally fine, although some houses were destroyed. And it's interesting because obviously unrelated to this podcast, but the research that I do is on climate change and all the emotional upheaval of climate disasters, including wildfires. And so it was like this really um, up close, present moment of why that kind of research is important for me.
Yeah, and in anticipation of our conversation, I watched some interviews and some podcast episodes with you, and this is not the first time you've had to evacuate or prepare yourself for this sort of thing.
No, it's not. So I wrote a book that just came out, and the opening scene in that book, the preface is about a moment of learning that there was a wildfire that had broken out in the area that I was living in at the time. And I was on a Zoom call with a group of colleagues, and one colleague on the call said, "We're getting ready to evacuate." And that colleague lived only a few miles from me, and I had no idea what she was evacuating from. And then it unfolds how I found out that there was a wildfire in the area that was starting to spread. And I was, in fact, under an evacuation warning that I didn't even know about. And I think, if anything, what bothers me is the infrastructure for notification, the logistics around raising awareness, warning people, letting people know where evacuation zones are, the difference between an evacuation warning and an evacuation order. I just don't think that our emergency preparedness officials really have a good handle on that. I, for example, live a block away from the evacuation zone for this fire that just happened Sunday, and I never got any kind of notification. The only way I found out where that perimeter was because I was obsessively checking everything on socials. And so for people who don't check socials or who just don't have a facility with various technologies, it's easy to get left behind.
Yeah, and there's an imminent danger that can change moment to moment, and it can geez, that could be so threatening. Well, I'm so sorry that this is something that you're reliving. Um, though I am glad that you're able to stay on top of, if the infrastructure is not there, you're able to stay on top of things enough to be able to move accordingly. And and yeah, that book that you wrote is this Climate Anxiety and the Kid Question. Is that the
Yes.
book? Yeah. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That was released this year, right? 2024.
Just came out a couple months ago in April.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, so how's that been going? I mean, especially as we go into wildfire season and as we are starting to see globally, definitely nationally, a lot more natural disaster and natural environmental issues happening. How has that been going with your book?
Um, hmm. It's hard to say. I mean, the book has launched well. People have been talking about it, people have been buying it. But this is a book that I didn't want to have to write. This is a book that I wish didn't have to exist. And the reason I wrote the book was because I was having so many conversations with people in real life, especially young people, people my students' age, people of reproductive age, Gen Z in particular, who are really saying, we're really distressed. We're distressed about climate change. We're distressed about, the lack of effective response to climate change. We're distressed when we think about the future, when we imagine the future that we're living into, and when we imagine bringing children into this world, into this climate crisis, into this future, we feel very deeply distressed about that. And morally and ethically, we're grappling with whether that's a good idea or not. And I think because I was having that conversation over and over and over again, and because this was so close to what I focus on in my research anyway, I said, okay, I think I'm the right person to write this book because some people were being left out of the conversation. And the conversation, it's really easy for it to just evolve into doomerism. And I think that's really dangerous. It can leave people feeling incredibly powerless. And even though climate change is a big issue that can feel overwhelming, we are not powerless. And so I wanted to write this book, yes, to talk about the scale and scope of the problem, but also to remind people that doomerism, we can't concede our future into this doomerist vision. And there are actually good reasons for having hope and being optimistic, or if you can't muster optimism, then perhaps determination. And so that's why I wrote the book. But I wish I didn't have to.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then, just in your own personal experience too. I mean, like the preface has a story of you escaping or having to prepare to escape a wildfire, like another natural disaster. So it's like this anxiety is uh, can reach different thresholds of intensity, and you kind of cover that experience with you in your own personal life. So yeah, I really am sorry that this is something that has been literally close to home. And but I do find it really amazing that you are able to connect with Gen Z and younger generations about how they're feeling, because it's a deeply upsetting world that we're all kind of moving into. And so to be able to share their stories, hear their stories, feel their concerns, and also be able to provide resources. I know that you talk about climate cafes and different things where you can kind of be able to discuss anxiety and avoid avoids kind of sitting in that doom
Mm.
that you're talking about. It really is. It's an amazing resource. So thank you for. I know you didn't want to write it, but thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. And can I just say one thing
Absolutely.
apropos of the podcast?
Yeah.
More and more people who are researching and writing in this space of climate anxiety and climate emotions are acknowledging the importance of mindfulness practices in helping people move away from doomerism, anxiety, depression, or at least sticking with those emotions. So, the research shows that, in fact, having a spiritual practice, and in particular, having a practice of mindfulness, is very helpful in moving people away from the kinds of overwhelming emotions that lead to inaction and paralysis, and toward more sort of active, engaged behaviors that can also have positive environmental and, sorry, not environmental, but emotional benefits.
Yeah, it was, and I was curious about that for yourself because you are. I don't know. I remember you had written an article. Why are there so many Black Buddhists? And that was about kind of your experience, maybe a couple years into Soka Gakkai at the time. Um, is that still an outlet for you for your spirituality, or has that evolved in any way? Because I know that for Soka Gakkai there is a lot of uh, encouragement to get involved with causes and with especially with environment, like any kind of injustices, but definitely environmental causes are a part of that. So I was just curious if that's still a part of your practice.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely am still a practicing Nichiren Buddhist, practicing with the SGI. We have a chanting practice, so we chant in front of a scroll called a Gohonson. I still do that every day. I can't really start my day without that. That is a required part of the day. And the reason why is because, well, it's an encouraged fundamental part of our practice. We chant morning and evening. And it's best to start the day in the right way with the right kind of mindset. But also, specifically for me, it's hard to be a climate change researcher and find things to be optimistic or joyful about unless I'm intentional about those things. And I feel that for me, the best way consistently to be intentional about finding joy, finding happiness, finding passion and determination and purpose comes through my Buddhist practice. Um, I'm sure other people find it in other ways, but for me, that's the only thing that has been consistent. And um, living in Southern California, where wildfires are now part of the landscape most of the year, among other things, I find that it becomes more and more important to have something that can consistently get me into that space of joy and happiness and positive motivation. Um, so yeah, still practicing Buddhist and still loving it.
Yeah, good. Oh, that's wonderful. And yeah, like with that approach of like that kind of finding joy, finding engagement with the present, does that help you with just the anxiety element too of it? Because I know that with part of what we're seeing and the frustration that's happening, there's the anger can be something that kind of bubbles up.
Yeah.
And does your Nichiren Soka Gakkai practice, does that help you channel that anger into like a motivating uh force, or does it more so act as a calming agent and just kind of helps you put things where they need to be?
I think some of both. As an emotions researcher, I have really come to understand that emotions are passing states. We don't live in one emotional space all the time. You can have multiple emotions that you experience at once. They pass quickly, or sometimes you can get stuck in a particular emotion and ruminate on it over and over again. And in some instances, that can lead to negative mental health impacts like anxiety, for example. So there's a difference between a temporary state of anxiety that I might experience right now based on these conditions versus the mental health disorder of generalized anxiety. And so for me, connecting it back to Buddhist practice, I used to try to reject anger. I used to have a difficult relationship to anger because I can feel anger and irritation over lots of things fairly easily. And I used to say, well, but I don't want to be like that. I shouldn't be like that. That's not a good way to be. And then when I started practicing Buddhism, I was like, but Buddhists aren't supposed to be angry, as if we're not human beings. What I have come to understand over time is A, you can use anything in your life as an opportunity for greater self-reflection, greater clarity, and greater, opportunity to transform your life and your circumstances. And that's the thing that we do in Soka Gakkai. Most of our practice is really focused on chanting toward positive transformation of our lives, to benefit self and others. So for me, I have grown into a space where I don't try to reject angry feelings. Instead, I use my anger as motivation to transform into something better. And actually, believe it or not, that book started off with me being very angry and needing to grapple with my anger in ways that were productive. I used research to do that because I am a researcher. It's what I do for a living. And so for me, those are the tools that are at my disposal when it comes to being angry about a big, overwhelming, complex social and or environmental problem. I can go to the research and do my own research and advocate for a different way. Um, but yeah, I was angry. I was really angry. I was reading all of these articles and listening to podcasts and just seeing this big discussion being had in our society about climate anxiety and other distressing emotions that young people were having about climate change. But people of color were being completely left out of the conversation as if we don't experience climate anxiety too, or as if young people of color don't take their climate anxiety into account when thinking about having kids or not. And I knew that to not be true. I knew that these were issues that were also impacting young people of color. Um, because climate change impacts people of color, and the evidence shows that the impacts can be far worse on communities of color because of social and economic marginalization. And so I said, this is a blind spot for researchers and writers. And, I don't know if they're just not thinking that people of color care about this set of issues, but it felt like an exclusion, a really important one, and it felt unjust, and I got angry. So I did some research and wrote a book.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for doing it. I mean, to have such a large and distressing gap in research happen, and then for you to channel that anger into making something productive and shining a light on something that was otherwise not not being allowed to be visible or otherwise ignored or whatever it is, written off. It's so important that you did that. So thank you for doing that research. So what has that experience been like when you're doing that research and kind of giving people a platform to talk about their experiences, share their anxieties about climate, about their um, growing family anxieties in this time, and also too, I mean, I know that you part of your work is the intersectionality of feminism, and how has that kind of all played into what you've been your experience talking to people?
Hmm. Well, I had to learn a lot about the study of emotions. It's not just enough to be a human being who experiences emotions. There is much to be studied about them. And of course, psychologists have been studying emotions and their relationship to mental health impacts for a very long time. More recently, there is a whole field of environmental emotions scholarship that has grown up mainly in the past 20 years as climate change has gotten worse. And so I needed to get a little bit of distance between my lived experience and what was going on with my research subjects, because simply because I have an experience or feel a particular way does not mean that that's what's going on with the people that I'm talking to. So I had to go to the literature. I did a big survey, a national survey of 2,500 people, ages 22 to 35. And then I did a series of interviews, dozens of interviews for the book, as well as interviews for a podcast that I created on the same subject. And for me, that process was one of learning and growing, both into self reflection, a lot of self reflection. I reflected on the research, on the book, on the writing process a lot while chanting in front of my Gohonson every day. And the reason why I had to do a lot of that reflection is because when you're steeped in hearing other people talk about anxiety and depression and other distressing emotions, it's hard not to feel them yourself. And I knew early on that this was going to be a hard book to write. I started the research for it at the height of COVID. I was already very anxious at that time. I mean, this was like March 2020 when we didn't know what was going on. I think we had just entered lockdown in Southern California and we didn't know how long we would be at home. It was a scary time. I don't recommend starting research on anxiety and depression under those conditions, okay? Um, but once I started the research, I said, okay, either A, I'm going to quit because this is too much and I can't handle it right now, or B, I'm going to have to really move this into the space of being a research question rather than my own lived emotional experience. So I had to really get some good boundaries toward my subject. But with that said, I had to be really present and really compassionate toward all of my research subjects and everyone who participated in surveys. There were definitely people who I interviewed who cried through the interviews. There were those who expressed a lot of fear, a lot of overwhelm, a lot of feelings of trauma, being afraid for the future. It was hard for me personally because even though I don't have children, I work with young people. I'm a college professor, and during the academic year, the people I spend a lot of my time with are between the ages of 18 and 25. And I have a good rapport with a lot of my students. I have a number of former students who I still mentor and have relationships with, and I see them semi regularly. So my relationships with young people in Gen Z are very important to me. And to hear so many Gen Zers expressing um, trying to think of what the best word is. There are so many words, but distress, not being excited about the future. That's not something that any young person should feel, and certainly not as an ongoing state. I got to grow up being very excited about the future, all of its possibilities, what I was going to do, how's my life going to turn, all of that. It was all a big question, and definitely there were challenges, but it was something to look forward to and dream about and envision. And for so many young people today, that excitement and enthusiasm and optimism isn't there, or it's being challenged by these big societal problems and or environmental problems. And I think I had to lead with compassion, which again gets back to my practice because, in the SGI, in our practice, we very firmly believe that everyone fundamentally possesses a Buddha nature, that that is the nature of who we are. And a Buddha nature is defined by limitless courage, wisdom, and compassion. And we have to summon those things up in ourselves every day through chanting. And so during the process of researching and writing this book, it became very intentional for me every single day while chanting. How do I summon up these qualities and live from the perspective of a Buddha nature? What does it look like to walk through the world, or more specifically, to do interviews and write a book from a perspective of limitless courage, wisdom, and compassion? So, to be honest with you, this book strengthened my Buddhist practice. Um, if I hadn't become a lot more disciplined about my Buddhist practice, I would have very easily kind of tumbled down into the hole of despair and anxiety and all of the feelings that the people I was talking to were feeling.
Wow. Well, that's for all the tensions and all the pressures and all the pain and all the various things that you were fielding and experiencing yourself on a personal level, especially during those peak times in 2020 when there was so much uncertainty. I'm glad that there is there is something that crystallized out of that, which was like a deepening of your practice and also connection. I mean, you made so many connections, and to your point about just the shape of things for Gen Z and everything like that. I clicked into your latest episode, I believe, for your podcast, which I think shares the same name as your book, Climate Anxiety and the Kid Question.
Yes.
And you were interviewing someone that was maybe 23 years old, and she was saying, "What I want in the future is clean air and clean water." And I was like, "Wow, like that's." When I was 23, I mean, I can't, I it was much more basic, or not basic, but more superficial, or trying to find out what kind of fun I can have, living
Yep.
in my early 20s. It's just that is it's an entirely different um, lack of opportunity that the Gen Z and younger generations are having to contend with, or at least field in their mind. And then I did want to kind of talk about the importance of chanting, because it is just from what we've been talking about, there is a quality to it that allows for reflection while you're doing it. And then there's this summoning up quality too. And I was curious, like, so, I mean, it sounds like an enormously powerful thing that you do that kind of bookends your day. And I was just kind of curious about the makeup of it. So is it the first thing that you do upon waking up, or is it the first thing you do, like kind of after you kind of get ready for the day and before you walk out the door and then experience the external world?
I think everyone is different. There is no one way. And there's no one saying you have to do it this way. Otherwise, you're not really practicing. For me, what works best, I have a little morning routine. I roll out of bed. I'm still not fully awake. I go downstairs. I make tea, come up with my tea, and I get right in front of the Gohonson and start chanting. For me, it's the best way to wake up in in the right mindset. If I don't do that, then the way that I will wake up will be with my phone in hand, checking email, text, getting on social, sometimes doom scrolling the news. And having woken up that way for years before starting to practice, I don't like waking up that way. And waking up chanting is a much, much better way for me. It sets the tone of the day. It sets the tone in a variety of ways, but since we've been talking about emotions, honestly, it sets the emotional tone for the day. I feel emotionally grounded and stable when I start my day off by chanting, no matter what happens. On occasion, I miss chanting in the morning, sometimes when traveling or if my schedule gets thrown off for whatever reason. And I can always feel it, especially if one day goes into two or three. Like you can feel it. You have a completely different day if you didn't start it off by chanting. Um, but with that said, for some people, they need to be fully awake, ready to go up and at 'em, clear-eyed, clear-minded before they get in front of their Gohon Sun, and more power to them. It's just that I know for myself, if I don't start my day this way, I'm gonna start it that way, and that way is not good for me.
Yeah, yeah. I find myself reaching for my phone in the morning, which is my alarm clock, and then it's like, oh well, learn to see if any I have any like dire emails, and then it's like, well, while I'm here, why don't I just check everything else?
Yes, I'm very
uh,
familiar with that.
yeah, yeah. So I try to make it so that if the first like half hour of my day, I really keep it to a minimum. My devices and just try to wake up with the day. And then for the closing of the day, does it feel like when you chant in the evening, does it feel like a cleansing, a shedding off of the day, like almost like a shower where you're now getting all of the tensions and anxieties and the various things you've had to deal with all day off, or does it feel like kind of a deepening of the day, another chance to get present again before you in order to best prepare you for sleeping?
I think again, it really varies. It depends on the person. And for me, it depends on what is going on and what has happened that day. Generally, if nothing big has happened, if it's, kind of been a regular day, then the evening chanting is just sort of a bookend. It's a nice way to close out the day, to have a quiet time of reflection. I reflect on the day. I reflect on what's going on with me and what has been going on with others. But it's more sort of peaceful reflection and starting to wind down from being so stimulated all day long. Um, if other things have been going on, let's say it's been a day of upheaval, like a day full of wildfire, for example, and evacuating from home, then the evening chanting is more of gratitude. Wow, I made it through another really challenging or unexpected event. Life throws challenges and unexpected things at us, and sometimes suffering at us a lot. And I think for me, I feel much more gratitude at making it through whatever the challenges of the day are when I'm winding down at the end of the day.
Mm. I think that that's such an important piece to add, to have a moment for gratitude. Just like I feel like that's something that I forget. Like sometimes like I feel like my own Buddhist practice is about being present and just like trying to really fully be where I am or and with everything as it is. But then the gratitude element has to help the just general appreciation and the level of enjoyment of a day as you go to sleep, or as you just in general, like even the chanting in the morning probably has some gratitude in it, for just kind of waking up.
It does. We also have certain prayers that we do. Um, We do them at the end of chanting. We have a liturgy book, and it includes gratitude for the practice itself and for, the organization which propagates this practice and makes it possible for new people to learn about this Buddhism. Um, and it's really interesting because it's very simple. I mean, it's not the the prayers in the book are not long, they're not detailed, they're not super involved, they're very short. You can get through them all in a minute. And yet, I think they're quite profound because centering your focus on gratitude at the start of the day and at the end of the day, for me, is a really important shift in perspective. Whereas otherwise, I might be focused on the challenges or the problems or the things that I want to change. And when I'm focused that way, I tend to take things for granted, important things. And so just having a little built-in gratitude practice every day, I find really helpful.
Yeah. Thank you for that reminder to make sure that element is heard or is a part of just a day to have, just to make sure that gratitude is present. And I was curious too, because you had mentioned that you used to start your days before you had your practice, where you would more or less look at your phone and in the morning and everything. When did Soka Gakkai begin for you, and what was your experience like growing up? Or did you, I mean, was Buddhism a part of your life for a while before you found Soka Gakkai, or was that something that is relatively new?
Well, let's see. I have been practicing with Soka Gakkai for it'll be 8 years in September. And prior to that time, on occasion, I had meditated. I had gone to various Buddhist centers and meditated there, but it was sporadic and inconsistent. And I think for me, the reason I never really stuck with it was that silent meditation just doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for everybody. For those it does work for, it's wonderful. And the interesting thing that I was not expecting is that over the years, as I've grown accustomed to chanting meditation practice, now silent meditation works for me very well. Um, and the difference between the two is, I mean, there's a different purpose and approach and reason why we do it, but chanting out loud and silent meditation are both practices to reflect on the mind. It's just we're doing those practices very differently, but those of us who chant, we're still reflecting on the mind. And so I think that uh I'm trying to formulate my thought on this. It has been so beneficial and so different for me because prior to 8 years ago and the little bit of time before then when I was kind of exploring meditation in various capacities, I had no experience with Buddhism. So I grew up in a non-religious but nominally Christian family with two parents who they had grown up in religious families where they were forced to go to church every weekend, and so they were very clear, when we have kids, we're not gonna make them go to church. Um, we'll give them a foundation, but they'll sort of be free to explore religion and spirituality on their own. And so growing up, we would go to church on holidays, and occasionally at other times, but we never had a consistent, practice. And then in high school, I suddenly became very interested in religion, very curious about it. Um, Started wanting to go to church. I joined a church on my own, separate from my parents and family, started reading the Bible. I was just very curious about religion and wanted a community and a practice. And very quickly after doing that, I started to find reasons why Christianity wasn't the right fit for me. For a while, I just thought it wasn't the right church. So I later went to grad school, moved to the Bay Area, Northern California, a very, very progressive community, and found a very, very progressive church. And for a while, that was great too. Um, but after a while, it just didn't fit. And I thought, okay, maybe nothing will fit, or maybe it's about just maybe religion doesn't fit. I joined a different spiritual community that was sort of generally new agey and that drew from a variety of traditions, but it wasn't based in any particular religion. And I did that for a while. But when I was introduced to Buddhism, specifically the SGI practice of Nichiren Buddhism, it just fit for me. And the reason why it is a fit for me is I love discipline. I like a daily disciplined practice. I also love to study. I'm an academic, I'm a researcher. I love reading and studying. And so we have to study in this practice. We read and study Buddhist philosophy every single day. It's a core component of our practice. And we have a number of different meetings per month, a neighborhood district meeting, a larger study meeting in which we discuss the things that we have studied to gain more clarity and to apply these concepts and principles to our lives. And that for me has always been very attractive. And um, I feel like I'm kind of wandering away from your original
No,
question.
this is great. This is perfect. Yeah. It's well, I'm really happy to hear that you found something that fulfills both interests of yours, where you can deepen in a regimen, and you can have a regimen that you can rely on, and it's consistent, and then you also have this uh, depth to it, right? You have this chance to learn about Buddhism and dive into philosophy, dive into meaning and practice in a way that you can share with a community, and then you also have I thought it was remarkable what you were saying about how the vocalization, that chanting practice, helped you then be able to be silent too. That helped you with the ability to meditate on a silent basis. And so when it comes to the study, is it mostly the Lotus Sutra that is like the text that you more or less engage with, or is it kind of more broadly, uh, or are there more things that are involved with study?
So the Lotus Sutra is the central text that we base our practice on, but we don't actually directly read the Lotus Sutra. We read um, a book of teachings called the Gosho, which Nichiren Daishonin, it is his book of teachings based on creating this Buddhist lineage focused on the Lotus Sutra. So when he was starting this practice in Japan, however many years ago, a couple thousand, he was reading the Lotus Sutra. He was practicing Buddhism based on the Lotus Sutra. He had a number of followers who he was teaching based on the Lotus Sutra. And so he wrote a series of letters that have been collected into what is called the Gosho, or the teachings. That's what we read. And then there are also a number of books in the SGI that are interpretations of the Gosho, because the Gosho is it's hard to understand. It was written in a particular time and place that is so removed from our context today. So we need translation, we need contextualization, we need help kind of applying it to what's going on in our lives. And there are a number of books and teachings that help us do that. So we read any of it, but really any reading that gets us back to the central concepts and interpretations of the Lotus Sutra is considered study of Buddhist philosophy for us. And
Hmm.
we do some of that every day, whether it's a sentence or a whole chapter of the Gosho or of another book, but that daily guidance is how we center our focus.
And when you say we, does that mean, does that necessitate a communication like via email or something like that with community members, or is it something where at the end of the week you've kind of looked at everything that you've studied together and then come together and discuss it?
So everyone practices on their own in their own homes, but in terms of dialogue with others, we have different activities. So we have a study meeting, a district level study meeting once a month. We have a district discussion meeting, general discussion once a month. And then at our neighborhood Buddhist center, where people from lots of different areas come, once a month, there is an in-depth study and discussion meeting where you read long passages of Gosho and hear an interpretation and discussion and Q&A. So there are different activities over the course of the month, but daily practice is solo on your own at home.
Hmm.
Um, you can check in with others, but generally speaking, the expectation is that we each take responsibility for our own practice every day.
And then when it comes to uh, I really appreciate you explaining to me how the it's these are teachings that Nichiren guess developed from reading and interpreting the Lotus Sutra, and then there are books that are about how to bring his teachings into the present day and contextualize them in a way that makes sense for our 2024 world. Uh, with your scholarly uh, interests and drive, would you ever want to be someone that writes a book about, being one of these people that dives really deep and recontextualizes elements of Nichiren's teachings for your community?
Hmm. At one point in time, I thought I would write such a book. And when I wrote that article for Tricycle magazine, Why Are There So Many Black Buddhists? My thinking at the time was, wouldn't it be nice to write a book about Black Buddhist practitioners within the SGI? And I don't know, I actually got started and wrote a proposal and started to draft, and then shopped that proposal around to publishing people in March of 2020. So let's just say it didn't go anywhere, wrong timing. But I think now I'm not so sure that I'm the person to write that book. I feel like for me, it's important to kind of stay within my wheelhouse because my wheelhouse is this research on climate change and reproduction and um, environmental emotions and young people and climate activism. And for me, that engages my passion, it engages my research skills and experience, it engages, what I'm most interested in, what I most enjoy doing. So I feel like for me, um, it's more important to focus my research skills there because I know that I can make a solid contribution. When it comes to Buddhism, though, it's hidden, but it's in everything that I'm doing. So again, the whole process of writing this research book was deeply informed by my Buddhist practice. It would not be the book it is if I had not chanted every single day. Um, and when I have interviews with people or conversations about environmental emotions, I sometimes talk about Buddhism, not in a prescriptive way, but to simply say, because people often ask me, well, what do you do to manage your climate emotions? What do you do to calm down after evacuating from a wildfire? What do you do to, sort of manage anxieties about future wildfires or whatever the case may be? And in those conversations, I often mention Buddhism or my daily practice. And um, and I also think that there are already good books out there about Buddhism and SGI Buddhism. So I don't necessarily know that one from me is needed.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that you were, it almost felt like, not necessarily that it was like fated or whatever it is, but like you were ready to go in one direction, and then the universe or whatever it is had other had other plans for you academically,
Yeah.
and you're making such an impact, and yeah, I think that with how you're explaining it, there's this really profound meaning in having your Buddhist practice lie beneath, serve as a foundation for what you're doing, and it allows you to no, you might not be explicitly writing about Buddhism, but your ability to engage with Buddhism, engage with your practice, has helped you uh, shine light on things that are, these people have Gen Z, and all these people that are being affected by climate anxiety have Buddha nature, and you're giving them a voice, and you're helping them find a way uh, to balance it, or to become a little less distressed. Uh, no, I absolutely see the value in what you're doing, and I was curious about like the dialogues that you have like as a part of a group, because Soka Gakkai, from what I understand, yeah, has this very important cause-based uh, mission, or like they're very much a part of the movement towards resolving injustices. And do you, when you show up for meetings, or when you are a part of the larger group, do you bring your findings in, or do you kind of say, well, hey, here's a foundation, here's a cause, or here are people that we can as a community get behind? Or is a lot of the organization efforts that happen for protests or for uh, policy changes, those all come from the group and then kind of spread out?
There is no one single mission or cause that SGI members get behind or are encouraged to get behind, except for um, being anti-war and being anti-nuclear proliferation. And our recently deceased president of the Soka Gakkai Ikeda, every year he would make a peace proposal to the UN about the importance of disarmament and the elimination of nuclear weapons and nuclear war. And that's in part because modern SGI Buddhism arose at a time in Japan, right at the end of World War II, where Japan had really experienced the devastating effects of nuclear bombs in their society and of nuclear war more broadly. And really, one of the sort of central tenets of SJI Buddhism is really about this deep, profound respect for all of life. And that's why one of our principles about being completely against nuclear war is because nuclear war holds nothing but the destruction of life in every way. So that is a central, sort of issue that is core to the organization. Anything beyond that is not prescribed. So I, for example, am passionate about climate change. Someone else might be passionate about children's education, early childhood education. Someone else might be passionate about the alleviation of poverty. But there is no one core mission or cause that the SGI is about other than nuclear disarmament and being pro peace and anti war.
Mm, mm. And is there a particular way that that effort is channeled outside of those proposals to the UN? Is there like an annual kind of get together or march or something like that that happens, or is it more just constantly raising awareness within the community and trying to spread that out, however it is up to the individual?
I think it's more individual, but there are some SGI members who do attend meetings at UN headquarters. There have been SGI members who have had internships or jobs within the UN and have worked toward disarmament from within. But again, not in a prescribed or formal way. Nothing is sort of decided and then handed down to the members of the organization, because people disagree on what causes or issues are most important to them. But it is important to really reach out and support members who are impacted by all kinds of social challenges and social problems. So, for example, um, when SGI members are devastated by floods or have their homes are impacted by fires or these types of things, SGI leadership will support them, help them find resources, secure resources, send and deliver resources, those types of things. So we step in and respond for members on members' behalf. Um, in various capacities, SGI has organized local disaster relief efforts for communities where members live. Um, but again, I think it's important to understand that when enough individuals care deeply about a particular issue, then they will mobilize with others to work on that issue. But it's important to also know that we just don't have a top-down kind of approach to you must do this, you must care about this, you must get involved in this. What we must all do and care about is having a deep fundamental respect for all of life, and how we express that through courage, wisdom, and compassion is up to us individually.
And I think that fluidity allows for a lot more understanding, a lot more conversation, and maybe a little more like balance and less like if it's too rigid, then there might be a lot of resentment or disagreement that's kind of held. And so allowing people to kind of get behind the causes that they need to, Whereas, but still kind of unifying around anti-war and stopping harm to life and to maintaining the integrity and compassion towards those everyone that everyone because of their Buddha nature. I think it's very important to kind of keep things like that. And then I was curious too, like has research while you were researching for climate anxiety and the kid question, did you, I know that some of that was during the COVID time, and so a lot of maybe your interviews were digital, a lot of your experiences were digital, but have you found yourself traveling? And then when you travel, do you find yourself gravitating towards visiting SGI headquarters or communities and buildings while you're out and about?
So everything was digital for a time, and actually all of the book interviews were digital, because that's what made it possible to interview people in other parts of the country. And yeah, for a while at the height of COVID, we were all chanting in our homes and never had any meetings in person. We started having meetings, discussion meetings, study meetings, et cetera, through Zoom. We're back to meeting in person, but I think this is a benefit, one of the benefits of the pandemic. We now have hybrid options for most of our meetings, and so anyone who is sick or elderly or has mobility challenges or, can't be there in person because they're traveling, for example, they can still stay connected to the community. They can still participate in meetings and not feel, you know, like there's a barrier simply because they can't be there in person. As with everything, it's not the same online as it is in person, but it's just nice that there are ways to facilitate participating in activities when you can't physically be present.
Mm-hmm. And then that you're able to engage on a national global level with people if you really wanted to, like you could tap into their communities, or you can then, if you're traveling elsewhere, you can tap back into your own community however far you away you go.
Right.
That's wonderful. And then I know we're coming to a close on our conversation, but I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk. And I had one more question, and this is just more general and broad, but um, is there anything that you would want to promote, whether it's something that you're working on, an upcoming work, a current work that's published, or is there something like a cause or a foundation, or even just general advice for anyone that is on the Buddhist path at any point of it, whether they're just entering or have been on it for some time? Is there anything that you'd want to share to them? Really, it can be anything that you'd want to have more ears and eyes on.
Hmm. Wow. I'm not prepared for this.
Yeah. Well, while you think about it, I'll promote for yourself. There's climate anxiety and the kid question, deciding whether to have children in an uncertain future. That's one book that you recently have published as of this year. And then you also have On Infertile Ground, Population Control, and Women's Rights in the Era of Climate Change. Two books that are out from you. Well
Thank
worth a check
you.
out. Yeah, of course.
Thanks. Well, I also would like to promote my podcast, which is also called Climate Anxiety and the Kid Question. There are two seasons. So, season one mainly focused on young climate activists who are uncertain about having children in the climate crisis. Season two, which just wrapped, is mainly focused on people who already have children and who continue to navigate climate anxiety and climate emotions as parents, while raising their children, confidently and comfortably in this moment of climate crisis. So, if reading a book, a research book isn't your jam, the episodes are short. They're all 25 to 30 minutes long. They're just conversations between me and others. The goal is to be hopeful and informative. It's definitely not a doomster podcast, but if anything about the topic resonates with you, I guarantee somewhere in those interviews you will find something, someone, some conversation that lets you know you are absolutely not alone. And I think that that feeling of um, finding other people who share your experiences and perspectives, letting you know that you're not alone is so important for so many people. It's easy to feel very isolated in climate anxiety. A lot of people are feeling it. A lot of people have ideas about how we can move through it, and continue to sort of passionately engage for the causes we believe in, including the cause of fighting climate change. So listen to the podcast, please.
Absolutely. And I would also recommend it as well. I haven't listened to every single episode, but what I have listened to, just like that episode that I mentioned earlier, there is something very powerful about hearing the voice of these people talk about their feelings. There's something a little bit that comes off of the page, that you can't
Mhm.
quite get from from just the written word, where you really are, this is that person really going through that thing. So it offers a really meaningful connection that you're allowed to listen into. So definitely would check it out as well. Dr. Sasser, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best. I hope things calm down environmentally near you, and that you stay safe.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. Take care.